this thing on your face. Why do you want to run around too? Like even Carmack, even John Carmack, the CTO of Oculus at the time, he wasn't convinced at all on active movement in VR. He's like, why the fuck would I put on a headset and run around? You know,
they're gonna want to sit down. And even the first experience with the Oculus, it was like an Xbox controller, and it was the two cameras in front of you. If you only had two, you couldn't even move all the way in a circle. And so it did seem to make sense. And we had the same story that we heard him say that, and then now, of course, he's talking about exercising in VR all the time with Beat Saber.
Yeah, the last time I see him, he's got the forearms and everything. He's like, these are Beat Saber arms, you know? Nah. These are Beat Saber arms.
So that then led you into starting companies in the XR space, the first one being Live. You want to tell us a little bit about co-founding that and how that went, what you learned from that?
You know, I was super interested in VR, and then there was this co-working space in San Francisco called Upload, which it was a great place for people to come together. I know there's been controversy about Upload, but I had a lot of positive experiences there, especially with some members of the team. The guy who approved me to be part of this co-living space was a guy named Oz. Oz ran all the mixed reality stuff at the location. And when I met Oz, he had this green screen room, and he was doing mixed reality where he was putting people in the game and showing everybody outside of VR what it was like to be in VR. And when I saw him doing that, it answered one of the biggest fundamental problems that we had in our space, which was, what the fuck are you doing, right? If you see someone in a headset and they're sitting down and they're just like going like this, like the first inclination a lot of people had is, are they watching porn? Like, what the fuck are they doing in that headset, you know?
And turned out 50% of the time that was true.
For your VR, I would say that was probably true, let's be honest. But, you know, when you move to like full body tracking, if you were to look at someone playing Beat Saber and not have any context at all, right? You're like, what? Like, is this person tripping balls? What the hell are they doing? But then when you took the virtual world and you showed people the context of what was happening, it went from dorky to cool. And I'm a strong believer that technology shifts happen when you make something dorky cool. It's as simple as that. And so if you look at the evolution of electric cars, Elon Musk would literally called his line sexy, right? Because electric cars up to that were like smart cars and stuff like that, where everybody thought electric cars were fucking dorky, right? And so one of the big things that I always look at in this space, how do we make this cool? And then Zuckerberg comes in there and makes it the most dorky shit in the world. Anyway, tangent, little bit of a tangent, but Liv was able to communicate something that was inherently dorky and make it cool, and also allow people a window into VR, so you could see what the person was doing in real time. And so Oz was doing this, I was like, this is amazing, and then how do we create a product out of this? And so that became the big question. Some of the people that I used to live with in this 50-person co-op had moved into their own apartment. Their name was AJ and Pierre, so they were my two friends. I went to them and I basically co-opted their living room into a big mixed reality green screen, and I was sleeping on the couch and setting this up in their living room. And we just got obsessed with it. I like to think of it as kind of like, you know, as kids, you would record yourself in the cassette player and pretend you were radio jockeys or something. I feel like we were kind of having that moment where we had this green screen, and then AJ went in there with a Super Saiyan hat on, and there was this game where you could have miniguns. It was called Serious Sam. And he had this video where he will go in and he had miniguns in his arm, and he had a Super Saiyan thing. It was just us doing ridiculous stuff. And AJ had experience in the startups more directly and how to speak to investors and whatever. And we got into Techstars from there, and Liv is doing pretty well right now. I think they just raised $8.5 million, and that's the story of Liv.
So true. We're saying though, it's so difficult to understand what people are doing inside the headset, and if you see a VM on a flat screen, it can even really be difficult. We struggle with that a lot of black box. Like, how do you show people? We still do. How do you show people what you're doing? And we create some different kind of green screen type of environments, but it's just so difficult and such a big problem that Liv is solving, which is still a problem, and people still struggle with that. But just how great it's been to see what Liv has done to help with that.
I wish they would make like a one-click mixed reality, partner with a camera company, and just press the button and go for it. But
it'll come out eventually.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, one of the cool things that we really appreciate you doing throughout your career so far has been taking this platform approach to building your projects and products. And yeah, the whole industry has massively benefited from those efforts. I probably venture to guess that Liv is maybe the number one piece of software used for mixed reality videos. And I'd probably say it's most, if not all, of the viral VR videos were probably made with Liv software as well. So Black Box VR, when we first used your software, we saw people finally understand, like, oh, wait a minute, you're in an arena, and oh, wait a minute, you're interacting with a machine, and you're doing fitness movements. And so, honestly, huge thanks to you and your team for doing that, because I think it's been awesome for the industry.
Yeah, the Beat Saber stuff was a crazy story. We were working with someone who is a fire spinner. Her name was Swan. So the story of the viral event with Beat Saber, I don't know if I'll ever have an event like that before. Like, some people say viral when they have like 1 million views or something. This shit hit 1 billion views, like globally across everything. There was one video on Facebook that hit 200 million by itself. That level of virality I have never seen before, and it happened to me. We were just creating videos, and it was usually just me or just some people I know, and I definitely amp it up, but you know, men in video games and stuff. Nothing super novel about that. So I had a friend named Swan, and she went in there and she was just like recording videos of herself, and we were not even thinking a whole lot about it. We were just like recording these videos and then posted it to YouTube. The first one she had where she had like a Jedi outfit on, and then the video that went viral was the second one that we posted on YouTube. And it started taking off a little bit, but nothing like outrageous. I fell asleep and I woke up and I looked down at my phone. It was like 300 notifications, and I was like, what the fuck is going on? And I opened it up, like, you're on GameStop, and you're on the front of that, and all over the place. They had taken her fucking video, and we had a watermark in the bottom right, and they had just, like, blurred it out. And I would call that moment the consumer event of VR. Before then, we were, like, early adopters that thought this geeky stuff was cool. But at that moment, it broke out of that limited market that we had. This videos can reach everyone. I'll always remember that moment. It was definitely a combination of a bunch of things. And, you know, the biggest learning that I had from Live that I take to the next companies after, which is important for this podcast, was that physicality was so essential to communicating to people why VR was interesting. Because anytime that we had mixed reality or a video of someone like sitting there doing something, no one gave a shit. But when you had added physicality and people were like dancing and involved in the content, it would perform like 100 times better. The way that I like to think about that is the difference between a movie and a play. So in a play, you're not necessarily seeing the facial movements of someone. You're kind of like removed and farther away. So you have to be loud and expressive. And because our face is covered and you're not like communicating, you know, the nuances of your face, you have to use body language. And it's the same thing that happens in sports, right? Like when you watch a sport, you're not looking at their face, you're looking at their body, right? And so the biggest learning from Live that got me into understanding the importance of physicality beyond my own passion with it was no one gave a shit about the content if people weren't acting. They just didn't care. They were like, okay, someone's being dorky in a headset. You know, I don't care.
It's such a good point. I mean, just the way you put it, the physicality, and people like to watch people doing physical movements, right? And sports and fitness, and so it's just this perfect mix with that Beat Saber video came out. I think we all were a little bit shocked. What is this thing? Like, it's something to do with lightsabers and music, and it's just everywhere. And then that's when we had like our non-early adopter, non-VR like expert friend asking us about it. Like, oh, it's that game with the lightsabers, you know? It's like everybody knew about it.
Yeah, I think Beat Saber owes you some royalties.
I was in there helping them a lot with marketing in the early days. I think that the success of Beat Saber was not necessarily just Beat Saber itself. It released with only a few songs, 6 to 7 songs. It was the content that made it interesting, and then there was a very large modding group that came out of it, of about 400,000 people. And that modding group made it so they basically took the base fundamentals of Beat Saber and allowed you to put whatever song you wanted in there. And I think realistically, if it weren't for those videos, and then subsequently that modding Discord to maintain its relevance, and then the final piece of that was that it became the flagship for the Quest, I think those were the three big like moments that you could say that connected to the success of Beat Saber. Every 6 to 9 months, there was something that hit right at the right time. There was a huge amount of luck involved, to be honest. That initial launch was perfectly timed. The game came out with a bunch of fanfare and all these videos, and then it became the largest VR Discord in the world of hundreds of thousands of people. They actually had to start kicking people out because it went over Discord's limit. We're creating mods with like different swords and songs and whatever, and that got around the copyright issue where most developers had to license every single song, which gets incredibly expensive. So they had this whole community essentially making infinite content. And then the final piece of that is when it came out on the Quest, it converted so well to the Quest, and it didn't have some of the issues that some of the other VR games had. Like Servios, for example, couldn't port a lot of their games to the Quest because of the fidelity that was necessary to port it. So there was a lot of developers who created really amazing experiences who had a really hard time porting it down to the Quest. So there was like 3 big things that really pushed the success of Beat Saber to the point where it hit 50% device penetration of the entire VR market. It was on over 50% of all headsets in the world, which was wow, that's nuts. That's nuts.
It's funny you say that because it's so true. Like the custom content, the custom songs, like that was the best part about it, right? It's like there was so many different songs and maps, and like endless amount, right? You could find any songs that you liked and all sorts of crazy stuff. And of course, people would rate the best ones. You learn new songs. There's so much music that I just learned about that I never even heard about that now I'm a fan of through that.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what kind of ruined it when it went to Quest, because it was a perfect experience for Quest. It's wireless,
Yeah.
so I was always playing it on the Vive or the Index. But going to wireless was just so great. They can make the 360 modes and stuff. But it kind of leads into the next thing is one of the best parts about Beat Saber being the flagship game that became like really the first mainstream game that introduced people to VR was the thing we always hear, right? Hey, I tried this Beat Saber game. It was super fun. I loved it. And then I realized I'm exercising. Like, it could have been some other VR game that wasn't really an active game that became the first big one. But the fact that the first big one had such an exercise cardio component to it was also really good for showing fitness as a powerful way to use VR. So tell us about why you are. That you into your next big thing, your next company.
Yeah, so I had to leave Live for various reasons. One of the reasons was the team basically became European based, and I had a hard time with the idea of like moving to the Czech Republic. I hadn't started a company thinking I would have to move to the Czech Republic. So I made some decisions to ensure that like my departure would be okay for the company, and AJ became the CEO, which was my roommate way back then. But I was itching to do something again right away. In hindsight, I probably should have taken a little bit of a break. Going straight from startup 200 miles an hour to another 200 miles an hour, it kind of breaks you. But I strongly believed in VR fitness. And prior to that, I'd been working a little bit with the VR Health Institute with Aaron Stanton. Yeah. So I'll give him credit. He saw VR fitness as becoming a big thing. And I was trying to find a way to work with him. And I'll say this, we were trying to find a way to work together, but he strongly believed in the efficacy of everything to like an nth degree. Like, we need to have it peer reviewed. We need to have heart rate trackers that are validated by whatever. And I was like, dude, we just got to prove to people that people are fucking exercising. I was trying to figure out a way to work with him. He didn't want to co-found it with me. He's probably a little mad at me now. Whatever. Like, shit happens in the startup world. But I decided not to work with him because he didn't want to be a co-founder with me, and he was so focused on efficacy of everything. And for me, having built a consumer company before, proving at all that people are doing something with the least friction possible is how you build a consumer company, right? So my thesis was, okay, we're going to move towards a headset that's no longer tethered. I think fitness is going to be one of, if not the biggest use case. People would laugh at my fucking face. Even Aaron had the same experience. Like, people thought we were a joke, right? He tells the story about how he was trying to prove to people that VR is fitness, and people would tell him, no, you're just scared. That's why your heart rate is high. Like zombies are after you. That's why your heart rate is high. It's not because you're exercising. It's because you're scared of what's going on. You're fucking exercising, man. He was trying to prove to people that it was the thing. I didn't have to be proved. I believed it, right? But I was just trying to find, how do we create a consumer product out of this? I started thinking, okay, well, let's try to solve this in a way that is the least friction possible. So I'm fast forwarding a little bit here. So another person that really believed in VR fitness, there weren't many, by the way. I remember a meeting that I had with Oculus during OCC, where I tell them, I said, hey, VR fitness is going to be a big thing. They almost fucking laughed me out of the room. They were like, what are you talking about, right? And I think this is mainly due to the fact that the way Facebook determines product value is based off existing metrics that they can go into a PM meeting and say, hey, this is happening, we should do that too. They have a very difficult time with foresight. And I think culturally that is the biggest problem with Facebook, is that they only operate on existing data and they don't have the foresight to see how something can evolve into something. And so I had that experience where they almost like laughed me out of the room for pitching VR fitness. Anyway, there was one other guy who lived in San Francisco who believed in VR fitness, and his name is Dylan. And I met up with Dylan, and I was like, dude, VR fitness is a thing. I didn't have to convince him it was a thing. And that was one of the biggest issues that I had with co-founding this company, is I would go to people and they'd be like, VR fitness, what are you talking about? So Dylan, I didn't have to convince him. And so we started YUR from that. And we got into Boost, which was a accelerator here in San Mateo. Basically, it was just because I think Adam Draper liked me. And he, like, if I'm going to be real, I think that's what happened. He was like, Six, I don't know what the fuck you're doing, man, but I'm going to bet on you. One of those things, right? Like, nice. Dylan hadn't even committed to being a company by then. So I came back to Dylan and I said, hey, if you want to do this, we're in Boost now. I have a little bit of money. So we wanted to create the least friction way to get involved in this. So our very first product was a mod in Beat Saber. And we already had, going back to what powered Beat Saber, was this massive modding community. And it kind of skirted around some of these different platform issues that we'd have, like, could we actually integrate into Beat Saber officially? Probably not, right? Especially not right out of the gate. So we created this mod for Beat Saber, and it became incredibly successful. We started, basically what YUR was a subset, initially, of the Beat Saber modding Discord wanting to exercise. And so that community that we built was initially the base group, subset of that Beat Saber modding group. And it was so interesting because this was a demographic that no one else ever appealed to in the fitness space. It was gamers, a lot of them super unhealthy, that were exercising by accident, and it was almost like Beat Saber made them feel like, I have a chance now to actually be fit. These were the guys that you've seen in the memes where they're like eating chips on the couch type. That was our main demographic, right? Was kids who felt apathetic to even the idea of exercising. And what it was a really good Trojan horse that made people have the confidence that they actually could start exercising, right? And that was the subset of the initial community in YUR, the subset of the Beat Saber modding group that realized, hey, I can actually exercise. That was our initial product. It went incredibly well. So then we created a Steam-based tracker that basically would take your movement data and estimate very rudimentary, initially, into what calories you were burning. And then it evolved into a Quest app that you had to sideload. And we got a little bit more fancy over time where we were using machine learning to estimate your heart rate based off data that we had on heart rate. But the goal was basically to create a Fitbit that didn't require any hardware. And that was kind of the underlying goal of YUR. And it worked incredibly well. I think we became the #2 utility in Quest for a given time until it was deplatformed.
So one question I want to ask is, just sounds like you are very connected to users through these projects and products you're building, which I think is really important for our audience to hear, because a lot of people building these experiences, people approach it from a bunch of different angles, whether it's, hey, we have a gut feeling, we're just going to do it, or we don't necessarily need the validation because we just feel good about it. Sounds like, from what you've mentioned and from what we gather, you're the opposite. You, of course, have the gut feeling, but it sounds like you have really stayed close to your users throughout the journey and listened to them throughout the process. So maybe just a quick little brief hit on that for our audience. What would you recommend as people are building the product as far as knowing which direction to go, validating the things they're building, and things like that?
You have to have a feedback loop with your users, right? One of the things that I did that you could argue is not a good thing for a CEO to be doing, and at scale that's true, is that every single negative review, I would reach out to that person and ask them why. And I'd be like, okay, so why are you leaving us a negative review? And they'd be like, well, the UI here sucks, or it's affecting the performance of what I'm doing, or I don't think it's accurate, right? And I chase after the people that didn't like our product and find out why they didn't like our product, instead of just being like, oh, man, I'm so sad people don't like what we're doing, right? I guess the difference between me and some people who work in tech is I get punched in the face and I just see it as, this is what I'm doing, right? When you start a company, if you don't want to be punched in the face, get a fucking day job, honest to God. Go get a fucking day job. And if the worst thing that's going to happen to you is your manager is going to be upset at you, that's a good day. You guys know this. Like, if you want to be a founder, you have to be able to, like, get punched in the face every fucking day and do it again. One of the lowest points I've ever had, a little bit of a tangent here, is I pitched during Techstars. And this is back before anybody really cared a whole lot about VR. And I gave this big, impassionate speech on why I believe virtual reality is going to be the future. And it was like, oh, I felt so good about myself. And the second I stopped, an investor raised their hand. And he goes, the second you said VR, I stopped listening. And I'm like, man, fuck you, dude. Like, what is that? Like, you discredit an entire category? Like, I don't care. Fuck off, man.
Isn't that crazy? We see the same thing. Like, VCs, a lot of times investors, they always talk about their future thinking visionaries. They want to be a part of, like, things that people haven't seen yet. But when you really talk about something that isn't already mainstream or big or that everybody else is already investing into, you're right, it just doesn't really compute to them. And it's the same thing, like you said, with like big companies. I would say it's not just Facebook, it's almost all big companies. Like they want data that proves it, and that's really what creates that opportunity for entrepreneurs is to get laughed in the face. And the interesting thing about being laughed in the face is half the time you should be laughed at, and the other half is the next big thing, and it's always impossible at the time without looking back in retrospect to know which direction it really is going to go.
I think the hardest thing as an entrepreneur for me is being able to distill constructive criticism from assholes, right? Because sometimes the people you think are assholes are actually giving good feedback. And sometimes the assholes are just assholes, right? And I think it's really hard to distinguish the two sometimes, right? Like where someone is giving you feedback, but you're like, it's just like, it's so personal to you what you're doing. You're like, okay, thank you, but fuck you, you know? You know, it's like that. Like, it's that.
That's my baby.
Yeah, it's like your baby. It's like someone going in and being like, man, your baby's ugly. And I'm like, who's my baby?
Yeah. What's wrong with you? That's funny.
Yeah.
And then years later, you look back at pictures, you're like, man, that baby was kind of ugly.
Person.
Right, yeah.
That person's great.
I guess, I mean, we're joking, but like, it's kind of just true to look back at the business you had. Like, when we first came out with Black Box, the onboarding experience was just not good at all. But like, we just loved it so much. And then when we first started getting feedback, people were saying some negative things. And of course, the first reaction you want to have is like, they're wrong and like all these things. But then you sleep on it and you think about it, okay, we need to make these changes. And it's a lot of hard work to make changes. But then you go back and you make those changes, then you look back at your baby at the time and realize like, yeah, that wasn't good. And hopefully that's always the case. Hopefully you look 2 years from now and always look at what you're currently doing and say, it was not nearly as good as it is now. Otherwise, it's stagnant. It hasn't worked. Having listened to that feedback.
I think listening to your users is absolutely foundational because if you talk to your friends, they're always going to give you a positive spin, or usually, or sometimes you just have a friend that shits on everything, right? And so your friends are usually really not a good proxy for whether or not what you're doing is good. And family is even worse. You know, family is either always going to be negative or always going to be positive, depending on if they think you're making money or not, right? So they're terrible for feedback loops. And then your co-founder, you can constantly be overly optimistic because you both believe in the same thing. So they're usually also not a good proxy. How do you get out of the bubble that is your brain into market reality? And the market reality usually just exists with the people that use your product, and getting them to actually communicate and tell you is, I think, the most valuable form of feedback for building a consumer company. Getting to the people that like your product or don't like your product and why.
A little follow-up to that is, do you have any small tips as far as how you go about intelligently collecting that feedback, or is it just straight up scouring the Facebook posts, setting up a Discord, or do you have specific things that you do, for example, create surveys, do focus groups, or how does that process go for you, collecting the feedback?
If you communicate with a person, like directly, it's kind of like the difference between talking to someone through 4chan and talking to someone through their face, like face to face, right? If you're on 4chan, you're gonna shit on everything. It's almost like straight from brainstem to face, right? Like, this fucking is terrible, that shit, blah, blah, blah. And then when they talk to you, they're gonna be like, well, I think you should, you know, improve this or whatever, right? So I think it's getting both of those perspectives, right? Because what you miss when you're speaking to their users are those who didn't even care enough to talk to you, right? Usually the users that you're talking to are somewhere between actual users and pro users, right? And you're usually getting not a lot of the feedback of the people that just churn instantly, right? They don't want to fucking respond to you. They don't give a shit. They don't want to tell you what their experience was. So you're going to have a blind spot on that category of potential users, right? So for those, you're going to have to like find it anecdotally through like Facebook posts or bad reviews. And this is why I would always chase the bad review people. If you're building that consumer product, to understand what's churning people from the beginning and what improvements can I make for those casual users, and then the pro users, should we cater to them or not? So I think that getting those three perspectives and maybe bucketing people in those three things is a good way to iterate on your product.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that, Six. So that's all for this episode. We decided to split this podcast into 2 episodes because Six had so much good stuff to share with you all. So join us for part 2 of this episode, where we'll dig deeper into Six's upcoming XR project and we'll hear more of his awesome insights. We'll see you on the next episode. Thanks for listening to the VR Fitness Insider podcast. Do you know of anyone that should be on our show or have feedback? Don't forget to email us at podcast@vrfitnessinsider.com and follow us at VR Fitness Insider on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can also join our Discord channel. Until next time, keep creating and dreaming up the next big thing that will revolutionize the world of fitness.
So, no longer with YUR, and now you started a new AR sports company called Rec, and I'd love to learn a lot more about that. So, how'd that come about? What made you decide to start that? And tell us a little bit about the product.
The latest company I started is Rec. So it's kind of a combination of the 2 prior companies and the learnings that I had there. So Live, the biggest learning was how do we reach the people inside the headset? How do we make it interesting for people to watch? If you combine that with fitness, which is, in my opinion, the biggest use case of headsets, the data suggests that retention for fitness-related apps is twice as high as anything else in VR. Yeah, actually, that's one small point to mention at YUR that we noticed. So we had an underlying tracker that worked on the headset no matter what, right? And what we recognized is that when people use their headset for fitness, they used it over twice as long. So the average usage length for a headset was about 18 minutes. But when they used it for fitness, it went up to 40. That was a huge learning for me, right? So the big learning from Live was we need to show what people are doing, and we need to make it cool for other people to watch. The biggest learning from YUR was headsets being used for fitness have the best retention, and I believe fundamentally it's the biggest use case of it.
寝ようかな。
Combine those 2 learnings of fitness and spectating, you create, there's
また明日配信しますわ。
company on the premise that sports is going to be the next big thing. And the reason I believe that
いい感じのとこまでは行ってるんだけど、
I did some ideation in augmented reality, and
結局シェーダーを
the same issues of VR, which
入ってい
is
く
like
感じにしましたね。
right? And a lot of AR apps have that same challenge.
で、SteamVR のカラーピッカーに黒がない件は、あれはそういう仕様、あえてやってる仕様だと考えて、黒は実装しないで白だけで、白とその他カラーでやっていこうと思います。今週中にはアップするんで。